122 days after the Yoon administration's brief imposition of martial law, all 8 members of the Constitutional Court ruled to uphold the impeachment of the president. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the foreign media coverage of this latest event. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, April 4th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. It was a unanimous verdict by the Constitutional Court earlier today to uphold the presidential impeachment. And before we start today's panel session with our members of the foreign media, let's first take a listen to this clip of the court's ruling earlier this morning.
재판관 전원의 일치된 의견으로 주문을 선고합니다. 탄핵 사건이므로 선고 시각을 확인하겠습니다. 지금 시각은 오전 11시 22분입니다. 주문, 피청구인 대통령 윤석열을 파면한다.
And now to share with us the foreign media coverage of this domestic political event, I have Steven Borowiec with Japanese news magazine Nikkei Asia live on the line. Steven, it's great to have you on.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I also have freelance journalist Rafael Rashid here in the studio. Rafael, it's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me back.
Right, Steven, we shall begin with you. Let's begin with some details of the Constitutional Court's verdict on this Friday.
Well, as you said, Sonny, it was unanimous, which I think was surprising to some observers in that there was a quite long deliberation period, and there were rumors that were circulating in local media that there was some disagreement among the justices and that we might see, a kind of more divided verdict. But they ruled quite decisively, and in explaining the verdict, Chief Justice Moon Hyung-bae pointed out a few things. The key point was just that the court concluded that Yoon had violated the Constitution and that they had concluded that Yoon's claim to have announced martial law in response to what he deemed to be a national emergency was not something that they found convincing. Moon explained that at the time that this took place in early December, the National Assembly had done things like held all kinds of regular meetings, and they were deliberating the budget. And, by all appearances, despite some obstructive tactics by the opposition, the legislature was functioning mostly as normal. So there was that. And also, I think another key conclusion was just that Yoon's legal defense, they had claimed that Yoon did not earnestly mean to enact martial law, that he meant this as a kind of symbolic or a gesture that was meant as a sort of wake-up call to the opposition to alert them to the problems in the state of affairs in the country. They didn't find that convincing. They concluded that martial law is not intended as that kind of a tactic. The Constitution is very clear that martial law is only appropriate in very specific circumstances, such as a war or another kind of very pressing situation. And Yoon violated the Constitution in the way that he chose to go about it. And so we now have clarity on those matters.
Right, we do. Rafael, Acting President Han Duck-soo was quick to address the public after the ruling by the Constitutional Court. What was his message?
Han Duck-soo, in a public address, he emphasized the need to accept the court's decision and to follow constitutional procedures. And he also instructed the government to work closely with the Trump administration, indicating a focus on maintaining economic stability alongside political order during this now transition period. Han also convened an emergency National Security Council meeting where he emphasized the need to have stability, especially vis-a-vis North Korea, warning of any potential North Korean provocations that might happen during this period. But overall, I think he's taken it on board and waiting for this transition period to pass out as successfully as possible.
Right. I believe former President Yoon Suk Yeol also shared a message to his supporters following this ruling. What's the latest on that front?
Yeah, he released a statement through his legal representatives just a few hours after the verdict came out. And I think this message expressed regret, but maybe not defiance. He said, it has been a great honor to work for the Republic of Korea. I deeply thank all of you who supported and encouraged me despite my shortcomings. And I will always pray for our beloved Republic of Korea and its citizens. So, you know, like I said, I think there was maybe regret, but potentially a little bit of, was it defiance? I think it's also worth noting that since the verdict came out, and also since he came out of detention, there have been no public appearances as yet, and I guess it remains to be seen whether this subdued initial reaction will follow in the days to come or not.
Right, and in the meantime, Steven, how are rival political parties responding to the court's verdict?
On one hand, the main opposition Democratic Party spokesperson Jung Chung-rae immediately, just minutes after the verdict, went on television and he welcomed it. He said that it was a just measure that would restore South Korea's democracy and order, and he had nothing but good things to say about it. A little bit later, the ruling People Power Party were not as excited about it, but they said that they would humbly accept it, and they issued an apology. And that probably is a key matter, I think, because I think one question hanging over this ruling was if the losing side would, like in any kind of election, like will the losing side concede, or will they question the legitimacy of the ruling? Will they vow to fight it? This response, I think, highlights a kind of interesting divide that we've seen throughout this saga, in that Yoon and his lawyers and various right-wing media outlets and a lot of Yoon supporters have taken a very antagonistic approach to the court, and they've vowed to fight the court. And we had Reverend Jung Kwang-hoon who encouraged supporters to resist any kind of decision. But the more mainstream right-wing organizations, such as the kind of legacy media and the People Power Party, have been a lot more grounded, and they've been a lot more respectful of the institutions and of the process. So I think to anyone who values stability in South Korea and the integrity of the political system, that was a particularly welcome development, because it signals that we can now have an election with the participation of both major parties, and we will go to selecting a leader and be on the path back to a more stable political situation.
Right, and as we await a snap election to take place within the next 60 days, Raphael, the public response to this latest event appears to remain divided.
Yeah, absolutely. The public response remains highly polarized, and I think this reflects deeply entrenched divisions in South Korean society that have existed throughout this crisis. Outside the presidential residence today in Seoul, thousands of Yoon's supporters gathered. Many were visibly distraught after the ruling was announced. Some of them were in tears. Some reacted with anger. There was, I would say, luckily there wasn't too much violence as predicted. There was a little bit, though. There was, outside the Constitutional Court, someone started to attack one of the police buses, breaking some of the windows, and then some people were posing in front of that. But overall, I think it was relatively calm. And I was there this morning. It felt quite, good, given what we were expecting. And then on the other side, the opposition supporters, they were celebrating the court's decision as a victory and one for democracy and for constitutional order. When the announcement was made, it kind of felt like a big street party, and on that side as well, people were crying. But if we look at the polling from Gallup Korea, just this morning we saw, again, just before the verdict was announced, 57% of South Koreans support the impeachment, while 37% opposed it. indicating a majority support, but still we have a substantial amount of people who don't. And then we have divisions, of course, along the generational divide lines as well, with younger South Koreans who tend to support impeachment versus maybe the older ones who wanted him there. So we do have these divides that exist now and will probably still for a while.
Right. Beyond borders, Stephen, the international media has been quick to cover the court's ruling as well, of course. And what has been the coverage from Korea's neighboring countries, including, of course, Japan and China?
Well, as a representative of Japanese media, I'll speak primarily about what my colleagues and I have been up to. The challenge here, I think, was to report on this in a way that is fast and that is accurate and that communicates not just the significance of today's ruling, but places it in a kind of bigger context. So we have a very hotly anticipated ruling that came after weeks of waiting, and it's coming at a time of quite pressing challenges for South Korea. As we all know, just this week in the United States, the government announced 25% tariffs on all imports. Not that long ago, the major financial forecasters have been downgrading Korea's growth. We always have the ever-present threat of North Korea. So this is a really kind of pressing time. And I think for outlets outside of Korea, like writing for an international audience and not for a domestic audience, the challenge is to communicate this kind of complex situation in a clear and digestible way for readers. So my colleagues and one of my colleagues was present in the court today, and he was able to relay the decision as quickly as possible. And what I was focusing on was a more explanatory kind of reporting. I was writing about how Yoon got to this place, what this means, and where we are likely to go from here. What I'm working on now, and what I think the foreign media in all countries generally now will pivot to, is prognostications and trying to parse of what an election campaign is going to mean. Who are the top candidates? What will they be campaigning on? How will Yoon's party seek to restore its public image? If, like as we saw in 2017 in the wake of the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye, will the opposition Minju Party be able to seize on this as a way of getting back into power? That all remains to be seen, but today's ruling is a milestone for the country, and it's a milestone for how the media covers South Korea. But as I'm just getting at in a story that I'm working on now, it is not an end, but it is the beginning of another transition period.
Right. Well, the media in the West have also described this particular moment as a very pivotal one for South Korea's democracy. Raphael, you're covering this event for the media in the UK. What has been your angle with regard to coverage? And of course, so do tell us a bit about the response from the Western media, including the US as well.
Sure. I think, like Stephen just mentioned, the foreign media, I think, try to have a bit more of a big picture, top line approach to this, especially when you have people many thousands of miles away who might not quite understand the full complexities of this situation. They want to know essentially, who is Mr. Yoon? Why did he do it? How is it possible in 21st century South Korea to have martial law? And what happens next? I think Western media have been framing this primarily through the lens of a failed authoritarian gamble. Reuters described Yoon as a brash ex-prosecutor who fell victim to political recklessness, highlighting how this declaration of martial law represented a severe miscalculation that ultimately cost him his presidency. Then we have the BBC went further into details about Yoon's personal characteristics and background, portraying him as a stubborn and hot-tempered person. But they, in order to make this kind of representation, they cited, childhood friends and former colleagues. And this BBC piece specifically noted how his prosecutorial instincts, kind of binary black and white way of seeing the world, was brought into the presidency and essentially hampered the way he was able to work. I think overall Western coverage has been portraying the Constitutional Court decision as a vindication of South Korea's democratic institutions, rather than focusing maybe on the kind of political rivalries that are a bit difficult to understand. As for me, I'm writing, or should be coming out soon, an article that basically looks at the rise and fall of Yoon Suk Yeol and what comes next, and what are the key kind of homeworks that will need to be done in South Korean society. Because whether or not he is gone, I think the fundamental problems of this deep division in society still remains. And whoever becomes president next is going to have the monumentous task of trying to kind of heal the nation or bring the two sides a little bit closer together.
Right. And in the meantime, Raphael, if I were to ask you to perhaps pinpoint a common factor within the coverage by the foreign media regarding this particular event here in South Korea, what would you choose to highlight?
I think the common thread running through international coverage is the framing of this event as a stress test for South Korean democracy. Ultimately, one that the system was able to pass. And I think foreign media has been consistent in emphasizing how South Korea's democratic institutions have successfully withstood unprecedented challenges from within. Another recurring theme, another parallel, I think, we're seeing a lot of media that are focusing on the parallels with Trump's MAGA movement, noting similarities in rhetoric and claims of election fraud and demands to stop the steal. I think there is a lot of international coverage that has also talked about, like Steven mentioned, the potential regional and global implications, particularly regarding North Korea, US, South Korea relations, and the economic impact in one of Asia's largest economies. So I think those are the maybe main themes that we've been seeing throughout.
Right. Steven, the former leader Yoon, he also faces a criminal trial on charges of insurrection. What's the latest on that front?
That trial is set to begin on April 14th, I believe. And the big question there is whether Yoon's martial law gamble will cost him not just his presidency, but his freedom. So that's a separate matter. The decision that came in today was strictly a political ruling, and it just determined whether or not Yoon would be able to remain in his position as president. But the criminal thing is it's a different part of the legal system. And I don't know off the top of my head what the, I believe the insurrection perhaps even carries a death penalty. Don't quote me on that, but it's a quite serious charge. And it might be a little bit easier for his legal team. If I could just speculate, it might be a little bit easier for his legal team to argue that he did not earnestly mean to carry out an insurrection because there was a kind of lack of comprehensive planning. He didn't have officers dispatched all over the country, and he had not put in place the mechanisms to hold the country under an earnest state of international law. But now that Yoon is out of office, I believe that he and his lawyers will be turning his attention to that, and it's a quite serious matter.
Right. Raphael, now, as we have mentioned, South Korea needs to hold a presidential election within 60 days. Let's talk about the prospects faced by the political parties. I understand this is a tough question, but based on your observations, what are the chances of the ruling party with regard to the snap election?
I think, of course, we don't know the future, but the ruling People Power Party, I think, faces tremendous challenges ahead in this snap election, presidential election. I think the party has been severely damaged and tainted by the martial law crisis and Yoon's impeachment. I think they may struggle to distance themselves from these events and from this crisis, particularly since a lot of their members either supported Yoon's martial law or they were against the impeachment, and they were steadfast on that and they didn't back down. They boycotted the impeachment vote in the parliament in December. So I think it will be very difficult for them to detach themselves from this, especially now that the verdict has come out not in Yoon's favor. I think the PPP will likely face a kind of crowded primary field, if you may, of the candidates that they might put forward for this election. And there are, of course, many names out there that people are suggesting might be the candidates. But at the same time, I think there will be internal kind of competition that could further divide the conservative base just when I think unity is needed the most. But I think maybe their best bet at the moment, or their best hope, is to emphasize economic stability or security concerns with North Korea, US trade relations, which is obviously a hot topic right now. So maybe if they talk about these things or focus on these things, they can perhaps shift the public attention away from this constitutional crisis that has essentially defined the Yoon presidency.
Right. Stephen, what about the opposition party? What are the chances of its success during a snap election?
Momentum is definitely in their favor. The only polling data that I'm aware of on this asks respondents to pick their preferred candidate in a hypothetical election. And at the moment, main opposition leader Lee Jae-myung is far in the lead. I think he had something like 34% of respondents choose him as their preferred candidate. And the next closest prospective candidate was conservative Labor Minister Kim Moon-soo, who had only something like 8%. So, like I said, the things are definitely tilted in the opposition's favor at the moment, because it's a kind of natural inclination to want a change of power at this juncture, to feel as though the People Power Party, by their own admission, as party officials said earlier today, that they had failed to uphold the role of the ruling party and that they had betrayed public trust. So you have to assume that, like anybody who is a swing voter, I think in the South Korean electorate, you have some pretty dyed-in-wool progressives and some pretty steadfast conservatives, and regardless of the current events surrounding any particular election, they're likely to vote with their normal party affiliation. But for anybody who is a swing voter, for anybody who is normally undecided and doesn't have, kind of a permanent political team, they would probably be leaning toward the opposition. But I would flag that if Lee Jae-myung is selected as the main opposition candidate, he himself is a kind of divisive candidate. Let's not forget that he was defeated when he attempted to run for the presidency in 2022, despite facing a quite flawed candidate in eventual winner Yoon Suk Yeol. He lost, albeit by a very small margin. But Lee has a lot kind of complicating his public image. He's been involved in a number of scandals. Just recently, he was acquitted of an election law violation. He also has just a number of legal cases that are trailing him. So it won't be hard if he is the candidate. It will not be hard for the People Power Party to poke holes in his candidacy, and he is somebody that provokes a lot of disapproval from conservative voters. As Raphael knows better than me, if you attended these rallies in recent months, you would see placards with Lee Jae-myung's name on them almost as often as you would see placards with Yoon Suk Yeol's name on them. And a lot of the people that you spoke to would name a dislike of Lee and an opposition to Lee as perhaps as big a motivation for their presence at these protests as wanting to protect Yoon. They would express concern that if Lee was in control of the country, that he would subvert the country's democracy, or he would give the country over to North Korea or China. Again, these are unsubstantiated theories, but these are what people say. So momentum is definitely in the opposition's favor, but I wouldn't say that they have exactly a smooth or an unimpeded path back to the presidency.
Moving forward then, Raphael, earlier you talked about how the next person to enter the top office holds the daunting task of bringing the people together. In the meantime, do you suppose politicians can do more, perhaps, to unite the people of South Korea?
In an ideal world, yes. I would hope so. But I think both parties, I think they need to admit or acknowledge their role in this polarization in the first place, instead of pointing fingers at one another. The Constitutional Court itself noted that in its ruling that the conflict between the President and the National Assembly is not attributable to one side and that both sides failed to show tolerance and restraint. And I think this mutual recognition and responsibility would be a crucial first step. Maybe this could be along the lines, down the line, constitutional reform could provide maybe constructive channel for this political energy. And I think Yoon Suk Yeol had kind of mentioned that he would go down that path had he been reinstated. I think politicians should, like I mentioned earlier, they should address the generational divide that is kind of plaguing society as well. But I think South Korean leaders should emphasize their shared democratic heritage. The events of December the 3rd, the martial law declaration, it demonstrated that I think despite the profound disagreements, the vast majority of Koreans remain committed to democratic principles. And I think this common ground that unites Koreans could serve as a foundation for rebuilding national unity. But of course, we yet to see whether that would be the will of the politicians to try and bring these two sides together and try to see eye to eye a little bit more.
Right, and perhaps the last time you heard talking about sitting together, the politicians from both sides of the aisle and having coffee, perhaps, right?
I mean, if I would love to see it happen, instead of considering one another as complete enemies and always attacking the other side, no matter what they do and what they say, or whatever policy they do, dismantling it. Of course, that's not the way to go forward, I think. It would be great to see with this upcoming election and a new administration that people are able to talk to one another and grab a coffee and a meal and see that we're all the same in a way.
Right, definitely something to look forward to then. All right, Raphael, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Stephen, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.